Once you've been programming for some length of time, you quickly come to the realization that code gets read a lot more often than it gets written. In other words, developers spend a significant amount of time working in code that's already been written, either by themselves or by someone else. And by adhering to a consistent programming style, you can make your job, as well as the jobs of your colleagues, a lot easier. So the Python Foundation has a series of Python enhancement proposals, or PEPs, which you can find on the python.org site in the developer guide. We're going to take a look at some of the guidelines specified by PEP 8, which is the style guide for Python code and can be found at this link. Now, obviously, following this guide is not required. I mean, you can write your Python code however you want, as long as it has valid syntax. But by following this guide, you'll make your code a lot easier to maintain and update down the road. So if you open the guide and scroll down a bit to the table of contents here, you can see it's really pretty comprehensive, right? It's a pretty lengthy document. Now, I'll leave it up to you to read up on the guide later if you feel like it, but I'm just going to cover the main points, right? So let's start with code structuring and formatting. So the PEP8 guide recommends that import statements all go at the top of a file, and each one should have its own line. And it also recommends that you indent your code with spaces instead of tabs, and that you use 4 spaces for each level of indentation. And it's worth noting, by the way, that Python 3 explicitly disallows mixing tabs and spaces in the same line. Individual lines of code should be limited to 79 characters, including indentation spaces. And for comments and docstrings, limit those to 72 characters. This makes it easy to have multiple code windows open and view them side by side, such as when you're using code difference tools to compare files. Functions and classes should be separated by 2 blank lines, and within class definitions, 1 blank line should separate methods. There shouldn't be any white space around function calls or indexes or keyword arguments. And speaking of white space, there are a few other subjects that get programmers all riled up, right? So white space is one of those things that just like fights break out over. So Python attempts to set a reasonable attempt at establishing sensible rules around using white space, some of which you can see in this table. And this probably won't be terribly controversial to most people. So for example, it's preferred not to use white space immediately within brackets or braces or parentheses or between a function call and the list of arguments. And similarly, don't put spaces between data structure names and their accessors. And it's also generally considered undesirable to try to align values with each other at the expense of variable name lengths. You can see that in column or row 4 there. In other areas, Python suggests, you just use your better judgment. So for example, it might be okay to add white space around operators with lower priorities, as you can see here with the combination of multiplication and addition operators. And sometimes it's better to clarify simple statements with white space rather than, try to mash everything close together. And again, most of this is covered in detail in the PEP documentation. So if you'd like, go ahead and read up on that to learn more. So I've also included a small sample code. So let's jump over to the editor really quick. So here in my code, I've included a small sample code file. If you look in the finished code, you go into chapter 1, it's right here. It's called codingstyle.finished. And this file illustrates some of the rules that PEP lays down. So you can take a look at this file to see some of the rules in action. And I think you'll agree that they make the code a lot easier to read. So feel free to read this on your own time.